This episode is brought to you by Mountain Glass Arts. For the month of February 2020, Mountain Glass is offering their North Star and Troutman first odds, seconds, and frit at 30% off. That again is North Star and Troutman first odds, seconds, and frit at 30% off. No coupon code needed. And for all you beautiful soft glass nerds, they're offering their Creations is Messy 40% off. No coupon code needed. And also make sure you check out Mountain Glass on a weekly basis. If you have not yet signed up for their newsletter, they send out their weekly sales that are going on. Stay tuned also to Mountain Glass on Instagram and also to a Glassblower's Companion on Instagram for updated sales and other things going on in the world of Mountain Glass. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, just go to mountainglass.com. That's mountainglass.com. Hello and welcome to A Wise Guy Minute, Episode 12. How to calculate baseline costs of goods and why. In the previous episode, I discussed the importance of setting a budget, not only for your personal finances, but also for your business. I really hope you take this information seriously as a business owner and creative. The functional glass or pipe industry is going to eventually come into a territory where corporations might become the frontrunners of success when it comes to the American glass pipe. Whether you've been a glass artist for a year or 20, if you haven't started taking your business seriously, now is the time. We need to think like a big business whether you are or not. All too often, artists get stuck in the mindset that being a corporation has a negative connotation. But the reality is, if you don't change this mindset, one day in the near future, you could be out of a job or even begin working for a bigger glass studio that has taken themselves seriously and has found success as a corporation. If you want to survive as a business, then you need to change your mindset and daily habits and start thinking and acting like a CEO of your company. It's the CEO mindset that will make your business grow. According to entrepreneur.com, quote, by thinking with this mindset from the get-go and ensuring it's at the heart of all business activities, other people will view you differently. Even if it's just you sitting around your kitchen table with a laptop, the outside world, including clients, suppliers, and potential investors, don't have to know this if you have an attitude and philosophy that screams CEO, end quote. This episode continues the conversation of creating good habits while helping you figure out how much it costs you to run your studio and manufacture goods within this space. This will then help you to fine-tune your budget even tighter once you understand how much it costs just to keep your doors open. This is necessary whether you rent space or work out of your garage. I know from personal experience that not everyone has the luxury to work from home. Many artists have to rent a bench space from another artist's studio or run their own facility. If you do rent from other artists, wouldn't it be amazing if you were able to afford to rent a 1,200 square foot studio that you could then build benches and rent those out to other artists, which would help you keep your doors open? There are many different business models when it comes to the style of business you are running, which we will cover in a future episode. In the meantime, let's get into the topic of conversation: baseline calculations. There are many important reasons for doing this no matter how big or small your business is. By making these simple calculations, you will not only be able to figure out how much it costs to manufacture an individual item, but also set yourself up to maintain your budget, forecast how much material is needed to fulfill an order, plus figure out whether or not you are charging enough for the product. If you plan on scaling your business by bringing on help, this will also help you calculate and set payroll. According to the website Investopedia.com, quote, a baseline is a fixed point of reference that is used for comparison purposes. In business, the success of a project or product is often measured against a baseline number for costs, sales, or any number of other variables. The baseline serves as the starting point against which all future sales are measured, end quote. When figuring baseline cost, you will need to repeat this process for each item you're creating. This will give you a clear picture of what each item you produce costs, the time it will take to complete an order, and the overall profits associated with your orders. This might sound a bit confusing, but bear with me. There is a link in the show notes that you can download and print so you can follow along from home and use for reference. plus a separate form that is downloadable too for you to use for your own baseline costs. So let's begin with a simple basic item that a lot of us have made and are still making. A 3-inch wrap and rake spoon or hand pipe. Now when it comes to figuring out material costs, this is how I do it. 1. Go to mountainglass.com and use their online catalog to figure out material costs. You'll see that this is a great reference point since they have already done all the work and broken each item of raw material down to costs per piece or gram depending on the material. Don't forget to estimate a small amount for shipping costs too. If a 48-inch tube of 32 by 4 millimeter Pyrex costs $8, that means it costs 17 cents per inch. In this example, to create a 3-inch single color wrap spoon, I use a 2-inch section pulled into a point. Whether you use a blowpipe or pull a point, there will be an extra cost for that material being used. So consider the point handle being created from 1/2 of an inch of 32 millimeter. So the point being used is 2.5 inches at a cost of 43 cents. And you would be able to pull approximately 19 points from one tube of 32 millimeter that is 48 inches long. Number 2, color used is approximately 1 inch or 10 grams worth of color from an average rod that is 18 inches long. 3, now you need to do a time test to get a good approximation of how long it takes to make 3 of one item. The reason I say 3 is the first one is the warm-up, the second is at full speed, and so is the third. For me, a 3-inch wrap spoon takes approximately 15 minutes, which includes the time to pull the point. Keep a notebook of all your times and estimates to refer back to. This will help you stay organized, and then you can see the progression when you recalculate these estimates annually, which I recommend. Number 4, now that you have some general estimates for one item, you will want to repeat this process for each item you create. When you do this, I also recommend that you keep one of each item as a sample, and with a marker, write sample on the pipe, or whatever the item is you are making. Number 5, you will also need to figure out how much you are spending on oxygen, propane, power, etc. to really figure out the cost per item. If you're renting space that is all-inclusive, then this can be a little easier to calculate. If you don't, just go through your invoices, or if you've done your budget, use those numbers. If you say you spend $150 a month on oxygen and $75 on propane, then add those totals and divide by 30 to figure out how much you spend daily. So just to recap, just remember, you can use mountainglass.com as a reference. Figure out how much it costs per piece of tubing or raw material to create. Estimate how many points or items you can get out of one tube of glass. Take that cost, divide it by how many items you get. You can figure out the bare cost per item based on the clear. Then you figure out your estimates for how much color you use per item. Figure out a time using 3 items that you create. Then take those 3 items, take one of them and write sample on it. And then from there, you need to figure out your other costs like oxygen, propane, your power, your rent, etc. Then you will have an ability to figure out how much you spend daily to run your operation. So here's an example of how I calculated the margins. Now remember I said the time it takes me to make one 3-inch wrap and rake spoon is approximately 15 minutes. This time is also based on me working an 8-hour day in the studio. These are also calculations that I have from about 3 years ago when I used to actually rent a studio space and had an idea of what it cost me monthly per thing I was spending money on. My rent, my propane, and my oxygen. Now I've taken my rent that I was paying at $550 a month, taken that divided by 30 days, and it's approximately $18 a day. My propane, I was spending roughly $60 a month, so that's about $2 a day. And my oxygen, I was spending roughly $255 a month. That's approximately $8.50 a day. So I take those numbers, I add that up, and that's $29 a day. Now, if I figure I'm working an 8-hour day, and that's 8 hours on the torch, I take $29, divide that by 8, that breaks it down to $3.60 per hour. Now I can figure out how much it costs me for a 15-minute time span that it takes me to make one spoon, which is 90 cents. So again, I add up my cost of all my numbers, I divide each one by 30, I add those up, divide that by 8 hours, and then break that down into a quarter. So a 360 divided by 4 is 90. The 90 cents for 15 minutes, that's what it cost me just to run the studio space. That does not include the material to make the pipe that I'm making. So that's just the basics: my rent, my propane, my oxygen. Now we do have other expenses that come in hand. We have shipping costs and other things like that, which you will want to add into these expenses. But for just this episode, I want to give you a generalized idea just to kind of simplify things, even though we're talking numbers over a podcast. If you print out the worksheets and follow along, it's going to make it a lot easier to use for references. Remember, there's one that is already filled out with all this information, and then there's a blank one that you can then fill in your information with to make things really simple for yourself. So now that I've figured out that it costs me about 90 cents every 15 minutes to work in my studio space, I now need to calculate how much it costs to make a 3-inch wrap and rig spoon. So I've figured that the materials for a 3-inch wrap spoon, I'm using 2.5 inches of 32 millimeter heavy wall, about 1 inch of color, which is about 10 grams, and it's based on 15 minutes to create. So I've estimated that the clear cost me about 43 cents. The color cost me roughly $1. So that's costing me $1.43 to make one spoon. So I take that material cost of $1.43, I then add that to the 90 cents for every 15 minutes it cost me to work in my studio, and that gives me an estimated total of $2.33 per 3-inch spoon to make. So that means if I have an order of 50 3-inch wrap spoons, it's going to take me approximately 12 and a half hours to create at 4 per hour. I have an example order now of 50 3-inch wrap spoons that I'm selling to a wholesaler. The store is going to be paying me $10 each at 50 per pack. That's approximately $500 gross income. $10 times 50 is $500. Now, the approximate baseline cost to manufacture these goods is, again, $2.33 each, times that by 50. That's giving me $116.50. Now, remember, your gross income is before your expenses. Your net is after. So my gross was $500. It's cost me approximately $116.50 at $2.33 per unit to produce. I subtract those numbers. It's giving me approximately $383.50 profit before labor. Now, if you pay yourself or an assistant piecework, which is what I recommend doing when it comes to manufacturing production pieces, not one-of-a-kind or higher-end stuff, but actual production spoons, like a 3-inch wrap spoon, you should pay yourself piecework. So if you pay yourself $5 per unit, that's $250 in labor, or you can also pay an assistant that has experience. So you take your $383.50, that is your gross profit before labor, subtract your $250 in labor, that's going to net you $133, and then you want to take 15% of that and put that in taxes, which is approximately $20. Now, when it comes to paying labor, you also want to consider taxes for your labor. So these are just things to think about. There's obviously, I'm not a CPA or an accountant. I do want to bring an accountant on here to talk about this kind of stuff because there are points in time in the process of figuring out your calculations where you want to do your taxes. Do you want to do your taxes before you do your payroll? Do you want to do your taxes after your payroll for the business? Because this is the $133 net profit is the profit that your business is making, because you also have to then take out your labor costs. So you got to consider paying taxes for your business, but also paying taxes for yourself. So just things to think about when it comes to doing your calculations. So the business retained earning incomes equal $113. And again, that's before taxes, which means that your business was making roughly $9 an hour at the 12 and a half hours that it took for you to manufacture those pipes. So as you can see, if you treat your business like a business and you pay the business first, then the government, then yourself, and whatever left over then can be allocated to a savings account for retained earnings. With this, you can break it down even further and save a small percentage of the retained earnings for an emergency fund in case you are injured and cannot work. If you have taken the time to figure out both your personal and business expenses, then you will have a clear picture of how much you need to have saved in an emergency fund for both the business and your personal life. The business emergency fund is there to cover the cost of rent and other overhead expenses that will keep your doors open. The emergency fund for your personal is there to cover your bills and other personal expenses. If you take the time to figure out all of these expenses, then you can have a clear mind knowing how much is coming in and going out and won't have to worry about how you will pay your next power bill. You can also use these calculations to begin scaling your business by bringing on an assistant or apprentice to begin helping you make some of the basic production items that you create and know how much you're able to afford to pay in piecework. For example, with a 3-inch pipe, if you pay yourself around $5 for each item, and you pay the help $4 for each item, and that artist can still then make $16 an hour. That is well above minimum wage for any other job that they would have. I really hope you take all this to heart and put this into action, for you will be ahead of the majority of artists in this industry and be able to grow your company bigger than you have ever dreamed possible. Thanks again for listening to the Wise Guy Minute. If you have any other questions or information, please feel free to reach out to me at wiseguymedia@gmail.com. That's WYZGUYmedia@gmail.com. And please help yourself by printing out and downloading these worksheets, as it'll make it easier for you to follow along and get yourself organized. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of A Wise Guy Minute.